myself out.
I am afraid of...
I'm terrified and paralyzed by...
I am deathly afraid of...
Welcome to the Sum of All Fears podcast with your host, me, Ryan Perrio. Hello and welcome to the Sum of All Fears podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Perrio. This week, my guest is relationship and ADHD life coach Shane Thrapp, who is the CEO and head of Creating Order from Chaos Counseling, where he basically coaches people with ADHD through life and relationships. He is an ADHD sufferer himself, and so he has gone through life. He got diagnosed in his mid to late 30s for ADHD, and now he has turned that into a passion where he couldn't work in the office, and so he got a home-based job with counseling and has turned that into his home-based business. In this episode, we talk about coaching ADHD growing up in the 80s, and then we get into his fear of mental deterioration like Alzheimer's or other kind of, just losing lucidity on life. And it's a really fun, powerful conversation. Let's go ahead and get an interview right now with Shane Thrapp. All right, my guest this week is Coach Shane Thrapp. Shane is the CEO of, Connecting Through Chaos. Am I getting that?
Creating Order from Chaos.
Yes, something I can't do. Creating Order from Chaos. I love your slogan. I loved your slogan is it's okay to live a life that other people don't understand. I feel like that is the best mission statement or message you could have as a coach to inspire people. It's like, it doesn't have to be ABC. You can be CAB or CBA or BAC. There is no right way to live life.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of been my philosophy since a few years ago, because all of my life, man, I told my therapist this for years and years. I said, I just want to be normal, right? I just want to have a normal life. And it was one of those things where she's always told me essentially the same thing over and over again. But finally, one day she literally lost her shit. And she was like, look, Shane, I need you to get this through your head. There is no normal. Nobody is normal. Everybody is different. Everybody has their struggles. Everybody has their things that they go through. Nobody is normal. And ever since then, I just kind of been expanding on that and just recognizing that normal is just a social construct. It's, and I take that to people and I just kind of walk them through it and kind of get them to understand that they have to just accept who they are.
And just like anybody with ADHD, it takes someone losing their shit on you for it to stick. Growing up with, what I perceived was ADHD, which is probably somewhere on the spectrum because there were just so much more to it. Because ADHD is one thing, but I would also have these anger episodes, and I'd have the hyperactivity and the randomness of ADHD, but then I'd have laser focus on certain things, and then I would have no eye contact, and I'd have things that would be like bipolar. And it just took somebody saying, "Hey, you're autistic," and me thinking that's so rude. And it was somebody I looked up to and wanted to talk to after a show. It was a comic that I work with, and I thought, well, he's just so rude. I never thought someone would be that hateful to me. And then I started looking up, on a whim. I just decided, you know what? Let's look up Asperger's, and lo and behold, all these things, all these little things, click, check. You have the capacity to do well at things, but you seem to always fail in class. You always, at your job, you seem to be one of the best workers, but you always just, there's 5 categories, 4 of them are A+, and the others below an F. It was just eye-opening, and it was I didn't realize that, and I kind of made inner peace with that rather than just kind of carrying it like my cross to bear, wondering what it could be. It was very refreshing to have, I guess, a diagnosis, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely understand that. That was kind of like, in my school, like I was amazing when it came to anything that had to do with reading, right? So English, history, the sciences, so physics, biology, chemistry, anything where I could read the book, I was amazing at, because I had something similar to an eidetic memory. So I could just read all the books before 6 weeks were up. I'd have every class read, and then I would just go to sleep.
Yeah.
I didn't have to put any effort out. I could just, read the books, and then any test that they gave me, I would just, smash it. Any book report that they gave me. I read Gone with the Wind in 6th grade in 3 days. And my teacher didn't believe me, and we were doing a thing called like accelerated reading where you got points for books.
Mm-hmm.
And so she made me take the test, and then she made me take the alternative test, and I aced it. And she was just like, okay, you couldn't have done that off the movie. And I'm like, I know, I read the book. Would you like me to like read some of the passages from memory? Because I can do that. And she was like, but all you do all day is just sleep. And I was like, yeah, I know. It's like, you don't do anything else in your class other than what's in the book. So all I have to do is just read the book and I'm done,
Sorry,
So.
I'm done. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Give me a bigger book. Give me War and Peace.
Yeah. But as much as I did really good on those, I did really poorly on math, right? So anything, even like physics, which I loved, when it came to the mathematics part of things, I was horrifying at.
Mm-hmm.
Like anything outside of like your basic maths up to like fractions and decimals and stuff like that, anything like algebra or geometry or trigonometry or anything like that, I was horrible at. And it was like, for my parents, like they were super happy to see like A plus, A plus, A plus, A plus, and then D, right?
Yeah.
And then like my science would suffer because we would have the like in my physics class or chemistry class, we would have all of the like reports and research papers and all of that, and I would do A plus, A plus, A plus on those. But then when it came to doing the mathematics side of things, the equations, the different types of breakdowns and of the theories, and trying to, I would just completely bomb those. I couldn't. There wasn't any way for me to process it right. Like, and even to this day, I'm still pretty horrible at math. Excel does, and Google Sheets does all my math for me. And so one of the things that I really had to learn was it didn't matter what I did. I was still going to get people were still going to treat me like shit about it. It didn't matter how good I did with all this other stuff, because it seemed like every bit of that was invalidated by just these, one or two subjects that I was really bad at any given time. And my dad was pretty abusive, and my mom was super religious, fundamentalist, strict. And so I didn't have a good environment, to bring home poor grades, and there obviously wasn't.
Sounds super sympathetic and understanding.
Yeah. So I just, once I started really, and especially with my kids, once I started really understanding what ADHD was, because my oldest son was diagnosed 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Once I started learning about that, I was just like, oh, okay, well, this makes a little bit more sense now. Okay, all right. Well, and of course I met my wife at this point, or eventually my wife, and she's a special needs teacher. And she was like, a few months into our relationship, she goes, hey, I'm pretty sure you have ADHD. And I blew her off at first, but then once I, of course, went down that rabbit hole, and started really looking into it, I was just like, okay, yeah, I think she's right. But it took me years to get diagnosed. I went through 3 different psychiatrists, and all 3 of them told me, adults can't have ADHD. It's a children's thing, right?
See, I've just always balked at that. It's like I just don't think you grow. It's not something you grow out of. I just think it's you find a way to cope, and you quietly cope is what it should be. I'd never have grown out of it, and that's another thing too that freaked me out with my mental things, is I wasn't growing out of the temper tantrums and stuff into my 20s and 30s, and that's, for me to even think about a relationship was alarming, because it's like I have no control over this, and I don't want this to be a relationship. I don't want to have these childish outbursts for no reason, no real logical reason for them, and not being able to explain them. That's scary. Even though I'm not the strongest man in the world or anything, it's still scary to have just absolute temper tantrums for, absolutely throwing my hands up, throwing things, breaking Nintendo controllers. It's not a healthy thing.
Yeah, I cannot tell you how many times Dark Souls has cost me a game controller. No, but as I was learning about the ADHD, that was where I really started learning about where a lot of my anger issues came from, because my earlier assumptions was that my anger came from my dad, right? Because he was alcoholic, abusive asshole. But again, when we think about ADHD and it being genetic, it is genetic. So I'm looking back at my dad going, oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, and then I started learning about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And it is essentially these it's part of your emotional dysregulation that people with ADHD and people on the autism spectrum have, where because our prefrontal cortex isn't the same as other people's. It's built differently. We're wired differently. We're not broken or anything like that. We're not damaged. We're just rewired. And, so because we're different neurotypes. But anyways, because we have this thing in our brain where anytime that we deal with like a rejection, even if it's like not really a rejection, but we perceive it as a rejection, or if it's a failure that we know we would get rejected for, or if we have a history of that within our lives, because most of us do, parents telling us that we're not good enough, parents telling us that we can't do a certain thing, even though it's our super passion, peers making fun of us, not allowing us to have the fun that we want to have. Those denials pile up on us, and as they pile up on us and we get older and older, we still have those outbursts because our emotions aren't like your neurotypical person's. We feel things more, like, because our brain doesn't process information the same way as other people's does. Our brains immediately feel it, and immediately it like sinks into us, and we that's why grief is really shitty for us. That's why anger is really easy for us. It's why we get super enthusiastic and excited about a certain thing, but anytime that there's a serious impediment to what we are trying to achieve, we can lose our shit. And it's a lot of people are like, well, why don't you grow out of that? Well, hey, look, motherfucker, my brain doesn't work that way.
My brain's not growing anymore.
It's like, so once I started learning about that, it helped me change the conversations that I was having with my therapist, and it helped me change the conversation I was having with my psychiatrist, because now I had a really good understanding of why I had such a hard time when people would reject me. And I had a girlfriend of mine, and I say girlfriend, she was a friend who was a girl. She came to me and she was like, hey, I got to show you this text. And she shows me the text and everything, and it is that classic meme that we see on Facebook and Twitter and Reddit all the time of guy proposes to girl on OkCupid, hey, how are you doing? And she blows him off, right? Even if she's nice about it, she still blows him off. And then it's a litany of, oh, hey, yeah, I'm a great guy, you just give me a chance. And then she may respond or she doesn't respond at all. And then the litany just starts getting worse and worse and worse. And by the time everything is said and done, it's like this psychotic mess of horrifyingly bad things to say to people. And I looked at her and I said, so I want to talk to you about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And what that means for people, because this is a good example of what that kind of looks like with some people, is I actually haven't done this before. Like a girl rejects me, I'm kind of like, okay, cool, next. And but some people don't, right? And especially people who are super lonely or are socially awkward, and they just don't have that social structure around themselves that they really want. And shaming them makes it even worse. And nobody should excuse that kind of behavior either. And I'm not making excuses for it, but I do want to explain it, And so as I'm starting to learn about that, again, I'm able to go back to my therapist and I'm able to talk to her about it. And as she's talking to me about it, we started working on different coping mechanisms, self-affirmations, really understanding what my strengths are, what my limitations are, understanding what is socially acceptable, what is not socially acceptable. And then of course, my wife is really good at this stuff. There's a reason why she's my wife and still, and that's because she's always been honest with me. She's always built this environment that I could trust and just be who I was. She really was one of the first women in my life who ever just allowed me to be who I was and loved me for it. Digs the way that I am. She actively encourages me. And because I have that environment, I'm able to deal with my anger a lot more. And so I'm able to break that generational curse that my dad was putting on me because of abuse. And then that always, a lot of times that travels down to the next generation as we don't have a good, basis for how to treat our kids. Our first reaction is what we learned, right?
Yeah.
And so, I was able to start really understanding gentle parenting, how to understand boundaries, how to put boundaries on children, how to understand at what level they're able to understand what you're trying to tell them, what boundaries you're trying to put in place. Because at 1, 2, 3, they don't get that shit.
Yeah.
They're acting, they're communicating. Every behavior is a communication because they don't know any better. And so then at 4 and 5, they start getting it. They start understanding it. At age 8, they really start picking it up, and they're starting to really be able to do things more and more. And then, so forth and so on. And so as I'm learning all of this, though, I'm starting to see ways that I can help people. And so that kind of goes back to my coaching, because I'm able to kind of help them build that environment around themselves so that they're able to advocate for themselves and tell people, this is what I deal with my ADHD. This is what it means for me. These are the different things that I go through. And here's the limitations that I have. If I have an outburst, right? If I have if you do something and I blow up, it may not have anything to do with what you just did.
Yeah.
It may be a buildup of all the stress that I've been under over here, and you just happen to be the last trigger that hits me really hard. And my brain is just going to snap off. And we need to work out what you can do and what you can't do, and then how we can come together later on and talk about what happened.
Yeah.
And so my wife has actually been able to give me that. She doesn't flip out when I lose my shit. She just kind of says, "Hey, do you need to go for a walk or anything?
Yeah.
Do you need your space? Are you stressed out about something?" And so that helps me. And so I help people kind of get that same kind of environment around themselves, even if it's working with their friends, working with their therapist, working with their spouses, how to talk to their spouses. And we kind of touched on this before we got on the thing. This is why I do relationships as well, because we need to understand as partners what our ADHD means. And if our partner doesn't have it, help them understand it. And if they do have it, where do y'all mesh really well, and where do y'all bump heads really hard? And so, Sorry, I get really passionate about coaching stuff. So
That's awesome. Like, but I'm it's amazing that you did the work to give your son, who also has the same affliction, ways to show, hey, it doesn't mean that we have to be this way. You're almost like a role model for saying, hey, I'm suffering from the same thing you are. This is what I've learned to kind of manage it and stuff like that. You're developing that with him. That's an amazing, I guess, it's a great bond to have, especially knowing that probably either your dad or your mother had it, but didn't do the research, didn't feel, and times were different, and, the results were always critiqued. Like when we were kids in the 80s, it was a cult thing, or, it wasn't a real thing. It was just a way to explain why they're just lazy. We're just giving them a pass to be lazy is one of the stigmas that I always tend to got, is that you just didn't try hard.
Right. I got that one. And honestly, in some cases, because of like we were talking about earlier, like all of the effort that I did put into the things that I really enjoyed, since it was invalidated by the failures that I had, that taught me not to try really. Yeah, okay, cool. You're right. I am being lazy now because there's no point. Right? There's no point for me to do this, because you're just going to be shit on me for the stuff that I do wrong. And we were taught that failure is really bad and mistakes are horrifying, and that you should feel ashamed for failing, and you should feel ashamed for the mistakes that you made. And then but then as we get older and older, like we don't learn the lessons, right? Yeah. We don't learn about that failure is how science moves forward. Technology moves forward because of all the failures that they make. That's how we learn. That's how we build success. Success is built on all the failures that we've made. And so I kind of have to redefine people's lives. To help them learn all the lessons that they should have learned as kids. We have to kind of start going through it. And I work with clients who are 25 to 55. And, when we start going through it, my methodology is pretty simple. Like I customize every plan for every client I deal with, because with ADHD and on this autism spectrum, you can't cookie cutter shit, right? Everybody has to have their own tool set that they can use to manage what they do. Some people like to journal. Some people like to use Google Sheets. Some people like to use Google or a Word document. Some people like to use Evernote. You have to find the things that work for each individual. And so I don't sell a cookie cutter solution. I sell a process of development, of discovery, of finding your purpose. And I think that's what's really been like my biggest help is by helping all of these other people and fulfilling my purpose in life. And that is to help people understand ADHD, to help people understand their relationships and how to communicate effectively and build an environment around themselves of trust and honesty. And I've had so much fun in the last couple of years doing this. I get to do it from home. I get to be with my 2-year-old twins and watch them develop and learn. And I'm able to start at like now, when they were born, to build that environment around them. Like I always help them explore and learn and love, even if they don't have ADHD, even if they don't have to deal with that, they will still have that environment. And every kid is going to excel and thrive in that kind of environment. It's really necessary for people with ADHD or who are on the spectrum to have those boundaries, to have that stability, to have that consistency, to have that honesty, that trust, and without the pain and spankings and the negative feedback that they really don't process to start with. Yeah.
My girlfriend has ADHD too, and so it's one of those things where I feel like a lot of relationships in the past, she's kind of taken it on the chin that she's the problem because she can't focus and she can't, that they constantly just turn everything on her and make her feel like maybe she gets to a point where she questions herself. And so I've literally, in my mind, just kind of been like, just everything's okay. Like I don't stress. I don't get mad if she can't, because she also is a mom too. So she's also a parent. And I was like, if you have to take a night to hang out with the kid, I'm not going to be angry at you for spending a night with the kid. I would rather you do that, because as an only child, I was an only child like hers right now, is that I would love to spend time with my mom and stuff like that, and just do little things, because the most valuable resource you can give as a parent to your child is time. In my mind, is that you give them that time. It may just be something sitting in your garage, but it's something that they carry with them. Those things. Like one of my favorite memories of me and my mom is that we would on Sundays watch TV, and we would have sour cream, French onion dip, Ruffles, and we would just watch TV together. And I couldn't tell you what show was on, but I could tell you that was just something that I really loved to do, and it would be something I would grab the dip out of the fridge. She'd grab the Ruffles. We would just, we'd have a little moment of just de-stress.
Yeah. In my household, we, like, our big, like, I didn't have traditions growing up. Like, I had your Christmas and stuff like that, birthdays, but our big tradition is every Saturday we do French toast, right? Mm-hmm. And so, like, the kids know when they get up on Saturday, oh, it's French toast day, yay! And, like, they know that when mommy is home on a Monday, that's her sleep in late day. She gets to sleep in late. She gets to kind of rest and relax. They like, they're 2.5 and they like get that, and so they don't bother her on those days. All I have to say is, hey, it's mommy's sleep in day, and they're like, okay, and they start kind of like tiptoeing through the house.
So adorable.
Yeah, it's super cute. And as quiet as they're trying to be, they're still 2 years old, so they're loud as shit. Mm-hmm. And so it's being able to be a coach and being able to be a stay-at-home dad has allowed me to really work on a lot of the things that I really messed up with my first 2 children with my ex-wife. Mm-hmm. Because I was working 80 to 100 hours a week mm-hmm. when I was with her, because she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, but we lived in Maryland and the cost of living was astronomical, and I wasn't able to be that close to my kids when they were that age. I wasn't able to be really in their lives until they got a little bit older. And now they live in Texas now, so our conversations are just phone and messaging and Facebook video calls and things like that. But we, it's not the same. You know what I mean? Like, they know that I'm here. They know that they can always call me. They know that they can always text me. They know that if they need a place to live, I'll buy the plane ticket and get them out over here. But they have their own lives. They're both teenagers now, so they're kind of like doing their own things. My oldest son is working. My second daughter, she's in a lot of sports and things like that. So she's, and it sucks. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I'm doing my best to be there for them if they need me to. So,
and that's all you can ask for. I mean, it's not like we can drop everything. Unfortunately, there are things in life that we have to do, and it's just I always feel like as long as you leave the door open, if they want to come through it, they know it's there. It's the true open door policy. It's like, I'm never going to turn you away. But just, I definitely want to be, if you want more, I would love to give you more. And I don't have kids at all because of my mental status growing up 20s and 30s, I was just terrified of that. I had an abusive stepfather, and I remember him just using fear as a disciplinary tool, like that I could literally would shudder when he was in the house, because he would just be so, he would get me worked up, and then I would say something wrong, or if I got in trouble and he would discipline me, he would ask trick questions or whatever, that in my panic state I would just answer just to get an answer out, and it would be the wrong answer. Like, I wouldn't understand, and looking back on it now, I understand that he wishes that I was, I guess, more of a male figure than I was as a kid, because I was just always small and meek, and so he was just trying to, I guess, instill character would be the word, but it's just not. It's not the best way to do it.
Yeah, my dad was a lot like that. He would take me hunting. Like I grew up on a farm, like way out in the boondocks. We lived like 25 miles from the nearest town of like 2,000 people. Our community was super small, and so like I grew up. We went hunting all the time. We lived on a self-sustainable farm. We had chickens and pigs, and we hosted cows and horses on our land. And so my dad always did that thing. Like I had to go, I had to learn how to go hunting. I had to go learn how to work on cars, and I had to learn all these different things that, he was like, I'm going to make a man out of you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was like, I just want to sit over here and read this book, man. That's all I really want to do. I'm going to read this book. I'm going to play my video games. And then, of course, when I was 12, my mom got our first computer, and that was it, right?
Yeah.
And I discovered Merc. I don't know if you remember that. It's MIRC. It was the big chat program at the time. AOL came next, and then. And like he hated that shit. He hated me always being on a computer. He just like, and I wasn't ever able to explain it to him. You know what I mean? I'm able to talk to people. I'm able to have a social life, and like these people don't judge me right off the bat because they don't get to see the social awkwardness.
Yeah.
I'm fucking Casanova when it comes to these fingers, damn it. And
it's amazing how calculated and choreographed you could be without the just the self-consciousness of who you are, or the appearance that you may bring, or the inability to lock eyes, when you can actually use the good parts of your ADHD versus all the different ones, all the like your recall. Like I have the same thing with memory. Like I can recall things about people like 20 years ago. I can recall conversations, which when you're talking to a woman that you haven't seen in 20 years and she's kind of flirting with you, kind of creep her out. It's like, oh, I remember when we had this conversation, and it's like, oh. It's like you just overwhelm them with information, and it kind of comes off as, yeah, that could have came off as a little like obsessive, or like too much stalkerish, maybe. I don't know if stalker, but just like, why do you still remember that? Like it's one of those things. It's like, maybe I should have just stopped it. I knew you like this, just kind of keep it to yourself.
That actually happened to me. I was getting I got an invite to our 15-year reunion, and class reunion, and one of the girls who messaged me, she was just super nice and sweet and everything like that, and all I could sit here and think about with her was like all of the times that she bullied me as a teenager, because I had this massive crush on her. Mm-hmm. And she found out about it, and she like ridiculed me in front of everybody, like
the worst thing you could do with it.
Yeah, like 200 people, and I hadn't done anything, right? I hadn't said anything overtly or anything like that. What had happened was I had written her a letter, and because I was going to.
Nothing worse than hard evidence. When you could at least it could at least be he said, she said, if you would just verbal, but
right. But it wasn't really like super flirty or anything like that. It was just like, hey, if you ever want to go out sometime, let's go out. I thought it was super banal. I was just being, this is what I wanted. But she like had the letter. She confronts me in the cafeteria, and she just like literally screams at me like, I will never go out with somebody like you. And I said, okay, cool. And and then from that point on, I just ignored her. I just like, okay, move on. But, as she's messaging me and she's talking to me, I was like, hey, you remember that time you like really embarrassed me in the cafeteria? And she was just like, Oh yeah, I remember that. I was like, yeah, that was really shitty. You know that? That sucked really bad. She's like, man, why are you even bothered by that anymore? And I'm just like, Jesus Christ, this conversation just went weird all of a sudden. So, needless to say, I didn't go to the reunion.
Yeah. But I as again dating someone in her daughter's. I don't know. I've only met her a few times because again, I respect boundaries and stuff like that. I don't try to be like, let me, we're together. Let me go ahead and hang out with the kid, and I don't want to be that stepdad ish kind of guy that's like, let me try my hand at parenting. I'm probably good at this. And so I've always given her, I always give her space with that stuff. But she tell me stories of being bullied, and I'm like, she's probably got some sort of ADHD thing, as well, that she tries to be nice, but whatever she says, they just immediately are, chomping at the bit to make fun of her, either by appearance or, because she likes to have short hair. And so they ask her, they bully her about that. They bully her about other things. And I was like, the more I thought about it, I was like, I just wish they had some sort of psychology in, like, from 5th grade, like, just start introducing kids to psychology, because you're teaching kids the most brutal way to climb a social ladder. If you actually let them learn, like, some of the consequences, like, from the book, to show them kind of the consequence of their actions, and also healthy ways to deal with it, so they don't just sit at home. Maybe you don't catch it as a parent because they just keep it, and they go in the room, sit on the computer, and they just, that's their way of de-stressing. But at the same time, you're not aware of what all's going on. You can only get secondhand information other than just having a camera on them at all times. It just makes me wonder why what have we used algebra for? Like, can we make algebra an elective and make, like, psychology? Because I will tell you this, when you talked about algebra, I was like, algebra is the worst, because algebra makes you think you have the right answer. And then when you turn in the paper, you'll get 9 of them wrong. And it's like, you do the formula as you think it is, and it gives you like that looks like it's a 7. And then they get it back and it's 2. And you're like, how did they get that out of that formula? I did the formula right, and then I solved for x was 7. No, x is 4. How is it 4? They never went back and taught you where you went wrong. You just got when we were kids, you just got, you did it wrong.
So one of the things, and I got to teach my oldest son this a little bit, but I learned about it too late to really be able to help him. Is a term called masking. And I didn't realize I was doing it until much older. Again, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 34, but then I started learning about masking. And masking is this coping mechanism where we learn that we have to fit into some sort of normal, right? We have to be some kind of normal so that people don't abuse us. They don't hurt us. And so I had this mask that I would wear around my dad, where I was super into working on cars. I was super into hunting, super into all these different things so that he wouldn't hurt me. Mm-hmm. And then I had to wear this other mask when I went to school, because I wanted to fit in with people. I wanted to be accepted by people. Yeah. And so that they wouldn't hurt me, they wouldn't bully me, and things of that nature. But the problem is we create this mask from all the different inputs that we have from the people around us, from the TV shows that we watch, from the books that we read. We create these caricatures, these kind of Frankensteinian amalgamations of what we think is a cool, neutral persona, mm-hmm. or a cool, funny persona. And the problem with that is, because we don't understand social norms, or don't get social norms like other people do, it's not perfect. It doesn't quite fit right. And I have a hypothesis about this, and I wish there was a way to like figure out if this is probable or not, but I'm going to pitch this hypothesis at you.
Okay.
I think the reason that people see through those masks and feel that it's okay to bully us and still abuse us is the uncanny valley. Because we have these masks that we wear, it's not quite normal, and we make the people around us uncomfortable because we're not really being our authentic human self. Even if that self is super socially awkward and things of that nature, they can tell that we're being fake. We're just not quite
it's
normal. Or
I call it suspension of disbelief. That's what I.
Right.
That is. That's. It's what your peers will let you get away with versus what you think you can say, and you broach that with your mask, and then it just all falls apart because I start seeing like, no, that didn't happen.
Right, and you since you put off this vibe of not being yourself, not being real, not being like authentically human. Since it makes them uncomfortable, they lash out because you're different. And since you're different, that means you're othered. That means you're okay. You're not within the tribe. And so then that tribal mentality kicks in. And once certain people within the tribe make the delineation of where you fit in the social hierarchy, then it gives everybody else the ability there to take their insecurities out on you. Because if they don't take it out on you, then they may be seen as
they're the next one that
other,
found
right
out.
And so one of the things that I'm really hoping that I can give my kids, my youngest kids, is that environment where trust and honesty and communication is wide open, and so that they don't have to wear a mask right here, at least at home. And then they can take the confidence that we give them here at home and just be who they are, because I'll never tell them not to be who they are. I'll never make them feel bad for who they are. And so if I can instill that confidence that they are accepted here, then if people do mistreat or judge them out in the world, they'll be able to stand up for themselves, hopefully, or at least know that they can come talk to me. And since I'm going to be massively involved in their schooling, I plan on being that parent. I plan on being the parent that my parents weren't, and be involved in school and be on first name basis with the teachers and be in the PTA and be involved with coaching and stuff like that. And I want them to know that they can come back to me. I want to be that dad that they can bring their friends over. We make cookies and shit. I want to be that stereotypical stay-at-home 1950s mom. That's my goal. Thank you. So,
but yeah, I agree. The bullying comes as a pack mentality that it's just like, it is kind of like you're seen as a leper. You're seen as somebody that's, because of your differences, you're seen as like a leper, and it's like, they talk about where if you're, I forget where's 300, I want to say Crete, but I know it's not that, but their group, if they had any kind of defects, they only kept pure. And I was like, that's basically high school. Is all the pure people, you just get cast out if you don't have this pure, this pure vibe that you put off. It's a lizard brain reaction to you, that because they see that you are the weakest of the herd, that you're bringing the group down by being in it, they're going to cast you out of it.
The Spartans.
Yeah, the Spartans. That's what it is. But that's the mentality. And I just wish there was some rudimentary psychology that we could have in schools that said, hey, you might have these behaviors, but it's not okay to do that. There should be a level of respect. And I just feel that you letting that go all the way up to college, it's like you've let the damage be done. You've let them grow up in this little, because when we're adults, our world is not 300 kids in a building. It's millions of people, in whatever city or town you grow up in. It's thousands. But for the most formative years of our societal life, it's a building of 300 people that are our world, and they're the ones that kind of, make the, kind of develop how we become and how we feel. And I just feel somehow, if there's somehow some way to say, hey, yes, we're all learning, but we need to do better. You can't just run roughshod over people and then, expect them to not have consequences. You're hurting yourself too by just allowing yourself to act like this, because then you have this entitlement, and then you get to high school or college, and then you run into somebody that's not going to bow to your, your high school superiority.
Yeah. I wish our schools would do that too. I wish our schools would do a lot of things. One of my biggest passions is education reform. And one of the things that, I have vowed to do as a parent is, since I'm going to be so involved, is provide that at least for my kids at home. But I also want to provide that for the kids that they bring, like the friends that come over. I want my house to be a safe place for kids to come and know that they'll be heard, they'll be respected, that they'll be able to do the things that they enjoy doing without any pressure from me or my wife to behave a certain way. As long as they're not breaking shit and being disrespectful, I legitimately don't give a fuck what they do, and within age appropriateness as well. But like, if they want to jam out with music as loud as they fucking want to, I'm gonna, okay, cool, I got headphones. Like, and I don't live close enough to neighbors that it's going to be a big deal. If my son wants to form a band, I've got a basement for that shit. Let's do it. I want to give my kids that environment. My in-laws and my mom and stepdad, they're like, my kid's birthday is in June, and they're like, well, what do you want us to get the kids? I said, musical instruments. Let's do this shit. Let's, because my son sets up, like, he's got an old snare drum, he's got a xylophone and tambourines and stuff like that, and he sets them up in this like semicircle, and he just starts going, and my brain, of course, my ADHD and spectrum shit starts losing its mind because there's too many weird sounds happening there. But again, I want them to have that safety, so there we go, headphones on. Let's do this.
Call me, when you got something else, and I'll come listen. And then for now, I'm just gonna bow out for a little bit and take. But I just feel like so much like the rudimentary, like that we're all good at something, and just because they're not good at the same things you are, doesn't mean that you're entitled to mentally or physically bullying them. That to me, that if you could just understand and respect their gifts, and maybe they're not the same as yours, but you don't have to shame them for them. You can just understand, like, hey, that guy's good at painting. And instead of calling him, homosexual or whatever, whatever insults, or breaking his paintings just because you see how happy he is with them and you're not that happy with who you are, that you take it out on him being able to find his passion and to enjoy his passion, where you're, basically either one trying to mask your cookie cutter, or just not, or worse, your parents don't have any, just you're at home by yourself with your thoughts, and you have no engagement. And so you want them to pay attention. Some bullies just want their parents to talk to them. And the only way they can get them to talk is to get in trouble, so that, and it's such a weird, dynamic. I had a bully like that in the fifth grade that he would just destroy me every single day. And it turned out that his mom had like left, and it was just him and his dad, and his dad was just so busy that he just never, the only time that he could spend with his dad is when his dad had to be called out of work to come get him for acting out.
Yeah, I've actually had a few clients of mine who they were really concerned with their kids because they were showing some fairly aggressive behaviors. And my wife and I, we work together sometimes when there's kids involved, because again, she's a special needs teacher and I'm an adult. I deal with mainly adult parents and stuff like that. But one of the things that I've learned working with her is that all behaviors are attempts at communication, right? It's some form of trying to get your attention, to get you to pay attention to them. And if you only give them attention when they do negative habits, and they will continue to do the negative habits, and they will get worse and worse and worse. So part of my work with parents is not just teaching them to communicate with their kids to how to get their points across, but also learn how the children are trying to communicate with them, right? And sometimes that's not verbal, especially if they have a child on the spectrum, or even ADHD kids.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not verbal. Sometimes they're trying to get this point across, but they don't have the verbal language to get it out. They don't have maybe their brain is going too fast and they know they want something, but they're not able to get, to process it. So you have to kind of learn how they're trying to communicate with you and give them the tools that they need to effectively communicate back to you, so that you're able to understand each other.
Yeah.
And so that's where tools such as like the speaking tablets, where they can type out on the tablet and they can say something, because when we are able to type things, this goes back to what we talked about earlier. When we're chatting on online and stuff like that, our brains are able to slow down and type things out in a much more coherent manner. Yeah. When we write things out, our brains are able to slow down, and even if the handwriting is messy, we're able to process that more effectively. And so sometimes it's making sure that those kids have that ability to do so, and that allows them to feel heard, and that cuts out a lot of those negative behaviors.
Yeah.
And they, since they know that they're being heard, they're getting the attention, the positive reinforcement and attention that they need. There's no need for them to act out. That frustration doesn't build up and build up and build up, and they know that they can get the help that they need if they're not able to communicate something effectively. They know that they can go, they can come to you and say, "I need help with this, but I don't know how to say it."
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed, was kind of building those relationships with parents, between the parents and their kids.
So how did you come into coaching? Like how did that, I guess, come to you as a career?
I've actually, so for a very long time, again, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 34. So I was, for a long time, when I was really from 18 to 24, I was just bouncing from job to job to job to job. Right. And then I fell into this job as a warehouse manager at 24. I don't know how the fuck that happened. I was like running a 300,000 square foot furniture warehouse, and I was doing really good, right? I had all the computer smarts and things like that they were looking for. I was really good with Excel, and I could learn different logistics systems really easily. I could pick that stuff up super easily, and so I was able to do the administrative work very quickly. And so then I'm 24 years old, and I'm working with these dudes who are like 35 and older. One of the guys was like 78, and they kind of looked down at me, but at the same time, because I did all that work so well, I said, okay, well, I'm going to learn what this means to be a leader, right?
Yeah.
And so I started reading. I started hyper focusing on what it meant to be a leader, and I learned about servant-based leadership. And what that is essentially giving your people the tools that they need to do their job excellently, and giving them the environment that they need, the safety that they need, everything that they need so that they can do their job more effectively, and accountability to say, this is the expectations, this is what you're doing, great job. Or, hey, these are the expectations. This is kind of where we're having some issues. What can we do to kind of get you to where you're able to excel without having that judgmental, not without having that antagonism towards failures or mistakes and things like that. And as I was doing that, these like older men were starting to look at me, and they were starting to show me a lot of respect. And then I started feeling validation for what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, I was like, I love doing this. I love managing people and working, as a leader. And so from that point on, when I started looking for a job, I started finding myself into those positions.
Mm-hmm.
And I started discovering that I enjoyed working at places where, like as a contractor or as a freelancer, because I could go into a role and I could work there for 6 months, and then the project would be done. I'd get that happy, dopamine fix because I did a thing, and then I would move on to the next thing. And so I started learning about project management. I started learning how to develop my strengths and what those were. I started understanding what my limitations were, and how to put people around myself who could fill those spaces, those gaps that I had. And that started my career of just kind of being a contract, project manager, project coordinator, business manager. That's kind of like these roles that I started filling. And so I started working 3 to 6 months at a time, 10 months out of the year. And then I'd have 2 months off so I could just fuck off and do whatever the hell I wanted. And I was making really good money. But in 2018, 2016, I had this breakdown. My oldest son had come out to his mother as bisexual. She had kicked him out, and I wasn't in a place where I could help him at that point.
Yeah.
And so I had this breakdown, a complete mental breakdown. I was really fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I got better from that, I went back into work. And I was working really hard. I was doing a lot of really complicated, high pressure project manager jobs. And eventually I started working at Cisco, and we were creating we were taking all the intellectual capital that they had, all the stuff that they had created, and developing an AI. And it was super high intensity pressure, and my body started shutting down on me. And they were super cool about it. My boss understood that I had ADHD. He was super okay with it. He helped me out. They gave me accommodations. And as I started getting sicker and sicker, they started letting me work from home. But, in October 2018, my body just completely quit. And they didn't continue my contract after that. And then in 2009, December of 2018, January of 2019, we found out we were going to have twins. And once we found that out, my wife was like, cool, this is perfect. You get to be a stay-at-home dad. I said, okay, cool.
You talked me into it.
So, yeah, okay. Oh, twist my arm. But like 6 months into that, once the babies were born, late, and they were born in June of 2019, I started kind of going, okay, when they get into pre-K, I've got to have a job. I need to have something where I'm bringing money in, because there's going to be shit that they need. There's going to be, and my wife and I, we lived well within our means. She's a special needs teacher, so she makes okay money, and we're smart with money. I don't have money. She has all the money because impulse. I get a set amount every now and then. But I started looking around trying to find something that I wanted to do. And so I started working with the ADHD life coach. And as she and I were working together, she was like, what are you really passionate about? And at this point, I'd really been researching ADHD a lot. I'd also been researching relationships a lot, because I wanted to make sure that I understood this for my kids. And I wanted to make sure I understood relationships for me and my wife. And I told her, I kind of listed out all the things that I was really good at. And she's like, hey, I just want to let you know, those are all things that like an ADHD coach does. Those are all things that a life coach does. Have you thought about that? And I'm like, fuck no, I'm a project manager, And she's like, well, look into it. And so I started looking into it, and I got certified. I went through a certification course with a really good company, Life Coaching Institute. Their program is really in depth, and as I was going through it, I was like, okay, yeah, right. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I want to do. And then, of course, I found my niche was in ADHD and relationships, and I started taking in clients. And I was kind of doing it as a side gig because my kids really didn't give me a lot of time to do like a full-time thing. But, as my kids have gotten older, I've kind of started, December of last year, I said, okay, like I'm going to actually form my business. And so I created Creating Order from Chaos. And so I created an umbrella company essentially that lets me do all of the things that I want to do. Right.
Yeah.
So not only do I have ADHD life coaching, I also have relationship coaching, and I teach people about ethical non-monogamy, and I teach people about leadership. And I'm going to have group classes where I do ADHD courses. I'm actually already doing that. I'm a moderator for the largest men's ADHD support group on Facebook. And we have bi-weekly support groups where we talk about a specific subject that we go through with ADHD. And as I'm doing that, I'm also able to lean back into what I used to do as a project coordinator, project manager. But I'm also able to now give them leadership training and team building. And so I'm able to contract with other companies. And so that's my next goal in 2023 is to form out that business or that side of my business where I'm doing business to business work, doing leadership training and public speaking and things like that. So that's my long path to getting to life coaching.
But that's awesome. I mean, it's really cool that you do it with your kids in mind, not just your young ones, but your oldest and stuff, to maybe help people, like your son that maybe, are having questions about their, sexuality and everything else and all that stuff, to be able to address those things as well as a life coach and, and to be there in, retrospect and stuff to really, help is super awesome, because we have so many set parameters on relationships that relationships should be only this is the only acceptable. And then
and relationships isn't just about like your partner you're with. It's also your kids. It's also your family members. It's your friends. How do you build a social circle, right? When you're this socially awkward, just finding yourself at 40 kind of person, how do you advocate for yourself at work? Because ADHD is a protected disability under Americans Disability Act, but so many people don't hit that check mark whenever they do the application. So many people don't hit that check mark for depression because they're afraid that that job isn't going to hire them. But what I teach people is, do you want to work for a company that won't hire you because you have ADHD?
Yeah.
Because are they, when you come and talk to them later about your ADHD and you need something, like your body is finally telling you, hey, you've got to shut down, or hey, your brain just isn't doing the things right, and you talk to them about your ADHD, then they can sit here and just say, that's not our problem. You didn't mark off that you had ADHD, so we don't have to do shit for you. And you can't do anything about it. Yeah. But if you mark that thing off, and he says, I told y'all from the get-go I have ADHD, and these are the accommodations that I need now. And they can't, at that point, say, we can't help you, because now you have a paper trail, and you can take that and get a wrongful termination suit put in place. And people don't know that. And so that's another thing I teach, is advocating for yourself and understanding your disability and things of that nature.
Yeah, I love the relationship aspect, because when you think about ADD and stuff, all you think about is school. Like it's a do well at school, do well at work, but there's a 65% element you spend away from that. You're only spending 8 to 10 hours a day with that, and so you're only treating 8 to 10 hours of a 24-hour day of ADHD, and so much of that interpersonal things, because again, like you said, there's so much with how much when they're bipolar have what's that disorder, the borderline personality disorder, where they split, they call it splitting or whatever. They just think the most childish basic issues, like they hate me, no one loves me. You just go through these super negative things, and it can be so isolating because you just don't know, you don't get, like, just like you said with the mask, your mask doesn't fit perfectly. So when you're out on a date and the stakes are never higher than relationship. Your personal emotional stakes are just, you're putting all your chips in the table, and they're just, nobody wants to take the bet, and you're just left there wondering why.
I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was a client, and she was like, I don't know why I keep getting these guys who are just complete assholes. And I said, how accurate is your profile? Because she has ADHD and she's bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, well, and she showed me her OkCupid profile, and I went through it, and I'm like, oh, you're wearing that mask. And she was like, what? I said, yeah, you're wearing a mask. This isn't you. This isn't anything like you. Where did you steal this from? And she's like, what are you talking about? I was like, no, like, you do not do art. She's like, and I wasn't being mean about it. It was just kind of fun picking with friends and stuff like that. And I was like, look, if you want to get the people that you want around you, then you have to be who you are. And that starts with if you're looking at dating and stuff like that, that starts with your profile. And like, when I was dating and stuff like that, and I'd learned I had ADHD, like that was part of my thing. I have ADHD. You have to deal with that. This is what that means for me. And this goes back to advocating for yourself, because the only way people are going to be comfortable around you is if you are authentically who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who stay around you, who accept who you are for who you are, that's your people.
Yeah.
And if people can't accept who you are for who you are, those aren't your people.
Yeah.
And you don't need to waste your time with them, because you're just going to get shitty with them, and they're going to get shitty with you.
Yeah.
And they're going to do something that pisses you off. And this goes to any relationship you're in. And so if you really want the people who you can be who you are around, then you have to be who you are, and do your best, and advocate for yourself, and let them understand, hey, sometimes my outburst may seem really, 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 really extreme, and I'm going to apologize to you in advance. It's probably because I'm dealing with a lot of frustration, and you just happen to set it off. Like, just give me some space, and I'll come back and just understand that my apology will be heartfelt, but I don't have any control over it. Sometimes I don't have the same kind of, and so talking about it and being upfront and honest about it really helps you deal with all those social anxiety and fear, because these people who stick around you and deal with this stuff with you, they show you that they're trustworthy. They show you that you can be honest with them, and that they're being honest with you. And that's how you build that environment of social acceptance, is by bringing the people who will accept you for who you are into your world. And that's how you kind of build this environment of love and honesty and acceptance around yourself, is just by just being yourself.
Yeah.
Even if that's socially awkward, even if that's really weird.
Yeah.
Like, cause like there's people who believe in flat earth on YouTube and Google and Facebook and shit. Okay. If they can have a fucking community, your socially awkward ass can also have a community. You just have to find those people.
Exactly. And that's what I try to explain to people as I've gotten older, and learned that in my 40s, is that do you want to have 1 million fans that don't care about you, or would you rather have 2,000 fans that'll come to every show or every show they can, and pack out a 200-seat theater, 200-seat comedy club, because you only need 600 of those at a time. If you have 2,000 fans that'll, everywhere you go, you don't need the millions. Like, if you had if 1 million people cared about you, that's great. But if they don't, then what do you need them for?
It's like the law of exponential growth.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you're the top of the pyramid scheme, right?
Yeah.
So you're super authentically yourself, right? And the people who dig you come to your shows and they really enjoy you. And so then they sit here and they talk to their friends who really enjoy and love being around them, the ones that are really authentic with themselves, and they're super excited about you and they're super happy about you. And of course that friend goes, okay, man, I'm gonna go check this guy out. Bob here thinks he's the fucking shiznizzle for some reason, and then they go to it and they're like, oh, hey, this dude's funny as shit. And then as more and more people enjoy you being your authentic self, you gain more and more of an audience, you gain more of a social circle, and you're able to thrive. And that's the best way to do life, right?
Yeah.
That's the best way to be in life, is just no matter what, as long as you're not being an asshole, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the caveat. If you're not naturally an asshole and abusive towards people and things of that nature, as long as you're being authentically who you are,
Yeah.
and doing the best you can and being the best good that you can, doing the most good at the most times as often as you can, you'll get those people around you who deserve to be around you and that you deserve to be around.
Yeah. And that's what I've learned. It took a long time. It's one of those things where I guess your fear as we get older is where your fear comes in, which is it's a real interesting one, but it's one that I have too, because you're like me. You have memory, and that's one of your biggest assets. And so tell listeners what you're afraid of.
So my biggest fear is losing my mental faculties. So Alzheimer's, dementia, any kind of mental impairment like that. Like, I already am physically, I've already got issues. I've got a bad back. I've got, fibromyalgia due to stress. So my body is, I'm overweight. So, like, if I lose my brain, I lose everything, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, for a very, and actually, I've got a living will. I have plans if I start to go downhill and there's no treatment options and stuff like that. I'm done. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't know how I'll do it. They don't have that legalized yet, but I mean, I won't live through that, right?
Yeah.
But knowing that you have ADHD, and there's some studies out there. I think there was one that was just done in Sweden, that was released recently, where families of people who have ADHD have a higher likelihood for Alzheimer's and dementia. Now, it's not a causation study. It's a self-reported study. It's just a study that says, hey, we should study this further and see if there really is anything to this. But my dad, and this is where the fear comes from. My dad, like, my mom left my dad when I was 16,
mm-hmm.
and essentially it took my dad 11 years to die. Like, he died at that point, but then he just kind of kept going for 11 years. And because he was, even as abusive as he was, because he was so codependent on my mom, and because he was so wrapped up in her, and because, like, she was his rock, when she left him, and she left him for good, it broke him.
Yeah.
Right. And I watched my dad's mental decline, from being this, what I had thought at the time, like this, like, huge superhuman person, into just this depressed, like, he forgot things all the time. He couldn't remember where certain things were at. He didn't realize that I had moved out. Like, I came back and he was like, oh, it's good that you came back by, room, your room is cleaned up and you're ready to go. And it was like, it'd been 2 days, but it'd been 2 years. Right. And, like, watching that it really fucked me up. And I'm like, and I just said, I was like, I can't survive that. Yeah. I won't survive that, because, the thing is sometimes you realize it, right? Sometimes you realize that you that something's wrong. Like you're lucid for a short amount of time, and to just kind of lose periods of my life between the lucidity, it would just be torture for me.
Yeah.
It just okay. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Well, it's just and it's one thing. It's one of those things like you can't see it coming. It's not something that it's just something that just slowly happens that it's your new normal.
Yeah, and like you don't know. Like a crazy person doesn't know how crazy they are, just like a stupid person doesn't realize how stupid they are. I just can't imagine. And it's not just me dealing with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because then your family also has to deal with that. And like my wife is the kind of person who would stick with me through it, right? Yeah. She would be there for me, and I like the idea of my wife having to go through that, and the idea of my kids having to see me go through that. I just it's just that's why it's a fear, right? That's why it's a phobia. Like it's irrational, like, right? I should feel loved and cherished by the fact that I know my wife would stick with me through it, but at the same time, it's just, I remember what my dad went through, and I remember me having to be there for him and be there around him when he was reliving periods where my mom was still there, like points where he thought my mom was going to come home from work.
Mm-hmm.
And points where he thought, she was just outside, like that she had just walked outside, and he went and looked for her, and then like he'd come back frantic because he couldn't find her, and he thought she had wandered off in the woods or something, and he'd want to drive somewhere, and I couldn't let him drive anywhere because he's like not only was he hammered, he was also in this state where he couldn't remember that my mom wasn't there anymore. And it just, that was a really, 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 really rough time.
Yeah. And I'm sorry you had to go through that. That's just tough beyond words, of just having to be a bystander almost for that. 'Cause there's no, there's no real way to correct it, because like there was a podcast, This American Life, where they were talking about like his wife's, it was a couple, and the wife's mother has Alzheimer's, and what they would do is, since they did improv comedy, they ran improv with her instead of like, no mom, that's not what happened. They would just yes and whatever they said. So it's like, look, I see a squirrel. Oh, you see the squirrel? Is it the one sitting on the tree? They would just, you would just kind of almost kid it, where you're playing make believe with your kid, when they're having a tea party or whatever. You would just foster that versus the correcting it, and then having them kind of have that sad moment where they're like, I don't remember, but then they still feel the sting of being corrected, like, no, that's incorrect. And then they feel, there's a burden that comes with that, of just feeling like, I'm sorry that I don't remember this, and that, that makes them feel like a burden to you. Like if they're constantly, your only words to them are like, no, that's not what happened. No, they're not here. You could be they just don't understand, and it's hard to, I don't know. I worry about that myself with like my parents and things like that. Like if their memory goes, or, how would I approach it? How would I have those conversations? Like, do I just sit there and say, do I let them just be and just let them, remember it the way they remember it, and just leave it at that? And then, just go cry in my car. and but yeah, it's such a hard thing to navigate, and it's, how do you even, know, how do you ask that of your kids? Like, hey, am I off? Like, do you ask your spouse at that point? Like, if you're starting to forget things, like, hey, are you noticing things with me about forgetting, or, just long-term mental, like, do you have that kind of, I guess, those checks and balances in place?
I do. Yeah. I think the reason why it's sunk in so hardcore for me is because when my dad would have those episodes where he didn't remember that mom had left him, like, I would have to tell him, and then every single time that grief would hit him, the same grief, like,
it's Groundhog Day.
same level of grief, and like he relived that over and over and over again for 11 years before he finally passed away. And I don't know what he went through when I wasn't there with him, right? I don't know what he went through. I don't know how he coped or dealt with it. I only know the times that I was there with him, and the times I came back after needing a place to live and stuff like that. Like, he didn't have a whole lot of friends, and so all I can ever think about is, like, him going through that and then not having anybody tell him where mom was. And yeah, that's our nation is really, people go through a lot of stuff, and they talk about suicide, and they talk about how horrible that is, and I understand that. I get it. Suicide is horrible, and for people who are dealing with it and who have suicidal ideations and are dealing with depression like that and stuff like that, they need all the help they can get. But what about the people who are legitimately done, right?
Yeah.
And they don't, they're perfectly cognizant. They understand, they have made the acceptance that they don't need to go on. They've lived the life that they lived. They're happy with it. And we look back at, like, Dr. Kevorkian and a few of the other doctors who have performed assisted suicides and things like that, and I'm like, if you're doing it of your own free will, and you've made that acceptance, and it's your life, right? And, like, everybody's talks about the family and stuff like that. That's cool. Are you, so is, if your family wants you to live, are they giving you the things that you need to live for?
Yeah. And
are they,
yeah. And I feel like you're also, because you're breaking that generational curse, that you're not, I feel like the house your dad had wasn't, because he was so, I guess, tough and not sharing or anything, that it just, nobody really, no one really knew what he was suffering from. They just knew, he just kept it all in, and when you do that, it pushes everybody else away.
Yeah, and that's why my wife and I have had, like, these very brutally honest conversations. And again, it's one of the reasons why I love her, is because she's never made me feel bad about, she's never judged me for my fear. Like, she understands it. She totally gets it. She, her grandmother had Alzheimer's, or she was kind of going through dementia there at the end. And, and she's very practical. And so, she understands the fear. She understands, and she also understands that I will have the environment that I need to to feel happy and loved and trusted and safe and things like that. So that helps me a lot. That helps me kind of deal with it. I still don't want to go through it. I still don't want to put her through it, but I know that she will go through it and still give me the ability to make the decisions that she and I thinks are best for me.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what helps me face it.
Yeah, it's definitely got to be a comfort to know that you have somebody there that is there with you, for it, through it, and with it. Not just not just when that she's there for the. I understand that this is going to get hard, but I'm willing to take that on because I would rather be with you than to like I'd rather just be with you, and. That's an amazing feeling. It's nice to have that kind of connection with somebody. And some people find it early, a lot of people find it later on. Some people sadly, search their whole lives, or worse, had it but make choices and stuff. Like my uncle, I'm sure he's on the spectrum somewhere as well, but he had the love of his life, and he scared her by getting drunk and violent, and it like broke down her door. And then, she just never wanted to be with him again. And he had to live with that he's had to live with that for the rest of his life, that he just, the woman that, I guess, the love of his life just wouldn't, she's gone. And you had that, and you threw it away, just on one angry outburst. And I was really young when it happened, but it was just one of those things of, one bad night took everything away.
Yeah.
And so I always try to worry, I try to live a life of, now that I kind of know what's wrong with me, it's like, okay, let me just pay it forward. I know what's wrong with me, so I don't feel like I'm this monster or misunderstood person. And it's
not what's wrong with you. It's just how you're different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But but when you're like you say, you go through the rejections and the bullying and everything else, and I still struggle with it. There's a level of authenticity I've gotten to with my stand up and stuff where I'm really hitting my stride, and I feel really relatable. I feel like the person on stage is as close as he could be to the person that's off. That I don't have this like you said, the mask, if you will, of being one person on stage and being another off. And it's one of those things where it's like, man, if I get now why people say, if I knew now what I knew then. And I just really just didn't know anything.
Yeah, I see those posts. If you could go back and tell time and tell your 16-year-old self 4 words, what would it be? And of course, my first answer is buy all Amazon stock. Because I was 16 whenever he started really launching that, and I'm like, man, if I'd had $1,000 then. But no. If I could go back in time and tell myself anything, it'd just be who you are. Just be authentically who you are. And I think that would have cost me a lot of pain. I mean, it would have caused me a lot of pain. I understand that now. I still would have dealt with a lot of pain, but I think I would have dealt with less pain than I have had to deal with. And maybe I wouldn't have turned out as good of a person as I am either, because, when you go through all the trauma and all that pain and the different things, that the pressures that life put on you, that's how you become the person you are, and maybe I would have been this billionaire, person who is completely cold-hearted and callous and things like that. So you kind of have to take what you've got and live with it.
Yeah.
And just be as happy as you can be with yourself.
Shane, I enjoyed this conversation. It's been a great time. Where can people find you on social media? Or they wanted to create Order from Chaos.
They can find me at www.creatingorderfromchaos.com. They can find me on Facebook, Creating Order from Chaos Coaching. And, I'm on a bunch of podcasts, so if you Google Shane Thrapp, I pop up now.
That's awesome. Well, it's awesome that you're getting the message out and that you're following your passions and that you're getting to live the life that you want to, and you're happy doing it, and you're stay-at-home dad, and life is kicking off for you. Maybe a little later than you thought, but it's better late than never.
Right. Yeah. It's a little, I'm 40 now, so it's a little late, but you know what? You don't really grow into who you are until you're 30, 35. So I'm not that far behind. I'm a happy person, and, I have a happy life, and my kids are amazing, and my wife is amazing. So that's all I can really hope for.
Thanks again, Shane.
Thank you. You have a great day, Ryan.
So that was Shane. That was a real fun conversation. You can really tell coaching and ADHD are passions of his, how much study and how much, I guess, information that he was just able to provide in just that little episode. And what a terrifying fear that, just something you can't plan for. And so I appreciate him being candid with that, and also, props to the ladies in people's lives that kind of help keep us balanced and allow us to be ourselves. Thank you so much for doing that. You can follow Shane on Creating Order from Chaos Coaching on Instagram, as well as Shane Thrapp. That's THRAPP. You can also see him on Facebook. Check out his website, Creating Order from Chaos. And he can help you if you have ADHD and live a happier life. If you feel like it's unfulfilled, he can help you find that fulfillment. So check him out there. Thanks again for listening to the Sum of All Fears podcast. This week I will be at Plano House of Comedy on Tuesday for the contest semifinals. Thursday I'll be at the Addison Improv with Derek Jack. And then Friday and Saturday night I'll be at the Hyenas in Dallas, Texas with Rob Little. Be sure to come to one of those shows. I'd love to see you there. Thanks again for listening to the Sum of All Fears podcast. Have a great week. And now some thank yous for the folks that make this show possible. Thanks to Barry Whitewater for my art and graphics. You can follow him on Instagram at bwhiteh2o. Get it? H2O like water. You can also follow him on Facebook, Music. A huge thank you to Gunnar Olsen for the wonderful music provided for this podcast. You can follow him on Instagram at gunbuns, that's GUNBUNS, as well as his website, gunnarolsen.net. Check out some of the samples that he has recorded. They're amazing. He's an amazing percussionist. If you want to follow the show, we've got a Facebook group, Sum of All Fears. Instagram, Twitter, you can find us at Some Fear Fans. If you have some feedback for the show, email me at somefearfans, SOMEFEARFANS @gmail.com. I'll be happy to take those into consideration. Also, if you'd like to be a guest, email me at somefearfans@gmail.com. We can try to iron out some details and get that settled in. Give us some feedback on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a review. It makes the show bigger, and it's not going anywhere. I'm going to record as many shows as I possibly can. If you want to follow me on social media, I am at Ryan Perio. It's RyanPerio on all social media platforms. You can follow me there, and you can check me out at ryanperio.com, my website. I'll try to list upcoming shows there as well. It's been kind of spotty because as soon as I set it up, that's when the pandemic happened. And everything's kind of just in a holding pattern. Thanks again for listening to the Sum of All Fears podcast. Next week, we'll have another guest with another fear. Thanks for listening.